So it is Sunday, and it's Sunday Live on the LB0 Fox India YouTube channel. And right over, oh, I managed to point the right way on the first try. Right over here, that's Steve, temporarily offline.
Yep.
So welcome, and I hope you got some opinions on or some thoughts on the subject of today.
Opinions are like noses. Everybody has one. Most of them stink.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to talk about emergency preparedness because this week is actually the National Preparedness Week in Norway, and let's see if I can find the official translation of the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection. Is the official translation. They got a preparedness folder that I started looking through. I've looked through it several times, but haven't really given it much notice. I've got most of this stuff lying around. And Lionel and Williams in the house. Welcome, guys. And
Hello, hello.
I don't know if Andy's here or he just commented earlier. Uh, and I did actually put up a Google translation of the site, and I showed it to you, Steve.
You did.
And it talks a little bit. Let's see if I can find the right tab here as well. And it talks a little bit about what you need to be prepared in case of a crisis. That crisis being a natural disaster or being war, whatever, where you cut off for a couple of days. And the national guidelines is you're supposed to be self-sufficient for 3 days. And there's a list here of what you should have at home. And it's the usual thing: dried food, enough water, some way of heating the food, either gas or a grill or a cooker or something. It is a battery operated radio, and you probably noticed that's DAB here, Steve. And I guess I got to explain that
Oh,
to
yeah.
you guys. That's digital audio broadcasting because Norway turned off FM broadcasting a couple of years ago.
Aren't you
Which from a
special?
yeah, which from a preparedness standpoint might not be as smart, actually, but that's a whole different story. A little bit of cash, just the usual preparedness stuff. But what's not here is a means of communication, and that kind of caught my attention.
Yeah, you can receive information, but you can't communicate outwards.
Yeah, and that might be critical in a crisis, at least in my thought. Um, and it's not like you need to be okay. Let's see if we can get Steve back here. There we go. It's not like you need to actually need to be a ham to be able to communicate, but you got to have somewhat of a plan. And what are your thoughts on the subject, Steve?
Yeah, so I mean, you don't have to be a ham in order to use a radio in a situation of an emergency. And I don't know how it's defined in the US, but I mean, I don't know how it's defined in your country, but in the US, it's defined that an emergency use of the radio waves to communicate without a license is only possible when there's no other means of communication. So if I happen to have a ham radio in my hand and a cell phone in my hand, and my leg is being gnawed on by a bear, I have to use the cell phone if it's got signal. So I have to check first. Otherwise, it's not considered an emergency because the cell tower was available. So, like, there's laws over here that are supposed to handle all of that stuff. However, if the cell phone service was down and I had a ham radio and I had no idea how to use it, what am I going to do? I'm just going to like turn it on and hope. What frequency do I turn it to? How how am I going to know if that frequency works in the area? Those kind of things. And that's why we need to get our licenses and practice beforehand so that I know that if I'm on the side of the hill that I need to bring the appropriate antenna gear and I have my radio program for the local repeaters and the local simplex calling frequency, and that would give me a much better chance of getting out. And then I need to know how to actually use the radio in order to do those things. So like just pushing the button and going hello and then nobody answers because that's not how radio works.
Yeah, and exactly because ham radios, it's complicated equipment, and if you're if you're never used a ham radio before, you're not just going to go out buy a Baofeng and have it work for you. It's going to take a lot more work than that. But we're still in a situation where most people aren't licensed. So I'm just going to take William's question here that Norway has DAB and no FM. Why? That was a political decision.
Isn't it always?
Yeah, about 20 years ago to phase out the FM broadcasts, with a thought that the rest of Europe was still going to choose DAB. And as far as I know, it's Norway, Switzerland, Denmark, and the UK that use DAB. But the only country that's turned off FM is Norway, and that's a completely different discussion. That might be a topic for another stream, but not here. But I was thinking though, if you're not a ham and you're not licensed, what are your options in the U.S. for license free or almost license free radio options?
Yeah, we have some UHF radio frequencies available, and we have the 11 meter band CB available for non-licensed use. So you'd be able to get an FRS radio without a license and talk within, I don't know, I think it's like 2 watts. So maybe half a watt. So I don't know, a mile. Height is might. So again, if you're on the top of a mountain and somebody happens to have an FRS radio and they happen to be listening, I mean, that's the other part of this is regardless of what radio service you choose to use, you also have to know, you have to have somebody else that's using it and they have to be listening. So,
Exactly. And that means you need a plan on how to use it if something happens.
right.
In Europe, we got PMR 446, which is similar to FRS. Half a watt radios can buy in blister packs everywhere, and could be a useful tool if you have a plan on how to use them. Say if you're sending your wife out to the grocery store, or well, probably not the grocery store if it's a emergency where power and everything is down, but outside the house, you still have a mean of communicating. And you could also do that with CB radio, but it all comes down to have a plan with the group you plan to communicate with in event of a crisis. And I've been starting to thinking a little bit about putting together a plan for my family,
Right.
especially since the security situation in Europe as volatile as it is.
Right.
Um, but I don't really know where to start, though. I know from an amateur radio standpoint where to start because I can use WinLink. I got 12 volt backup on all my equipment, so I could use WinLink. I could use repeaters to get out of the area, which might be outside communication. But it's much harder to communicate with people that aren't licensed, though. And I would think that let me see if we can get the web page up again. If there was a little bit of paragraph here about having let's say a PMR radio here, that would at least manage to have more people having those radios, and they would be able to go to somewhat of a common channel to get more communications going. Or am I overthinking this?
You probably are not overthinking it at all, but we do need to start a little bit sooner than that. So your preparedness plan website there says have 3 days worth of food, and they talk about two packages of crackers per person, 1 packet of oatmeal per person. That's not 2 days worth of food. So you need to have that stored up, and it needs to be food that can last. It doesn't necessarily need to be the most organic, most healthiest, most natural food on the planet. It needs to be sustenance that's going to get you back to normal. So that's step one. The other step, let's think a little bit of worst case scenarios inside of your house. Like what happens if your house catches fire? You don't have any of those backup plans because they're all stored in your house, but you have to have your family safety plan of where you're going to meet in the event of something like that. And I kind of teach this in some classes here where, yeah, we're going to go outside and meet at the tree. Okay. So me being the dad in my family, and I've got a wife and 5 daughters to take care of, I'm going to go outside. Everybody's going to be at the front tree in the front yard that we didn't actually discuss in the plan. We just said meet at the tree and never practiced. And so now I'm 2 daughters short. Who's got to go in the house and find them? That's me. That's my job. So we got to be very specific about which tree it is to meet at, because those 2 daughters are actually out in the backyard at the tree in the backyard, and they're perfectly safe. they're just not there with me. I'm not there with them. They don't know what to do. I don't know where they are. So I'm running back into a burning house to find my kids that aren't even in there. So outline the plan and actually practice it. It's important that everybody knows and everybody agrees. Over here we have a 911 emergency number that everybody knows about because it's just beaten into us. I don't know what your emergency number is there. And if I was in Norway, would I dial 911 and would it work?
No, it wouldn't. If
Right.
you dialed 112, though, that would work all across Europe.
And I have no knowledge of that.
Perhaps except for the UK, and probably the British people can't answer that. But I think the British use 999 out of some strange reason. But that's a good point, though. You need to know the information before a crisis hits, and you need to know how to use the equipment and have a plan. And a crisis doesn't necessarily have to be war or an invading force. It could be, as you said, your house is on fire, which from a preparedness standpoint might be easier to handle, though, if you get everyone out, because there will be people around to help you.
Right.
But it might be that. It might be a storm. It might be a forest fire.
We get a lot of storms here.
Yeah. And in my part of Norway, forest fire is probably the biggest risk, at least in the summer, because there's a lot of forests around. We're not at a place where there are a lot of big storms, but a natural disaster might happen nonetheless. It might just be the power grid failing, and if the power grid fails for long enough, the cell towers will go down.
Because they're on battery backup and generators.
Yeah. For a while, but let's say it takes a week and you got 3 days of battery backup, then communications will go down. So preparedness is not only for those wacky places or the wacky people you see on National Geographic Channel and similar. It's also about what could happen in everyday life. Although at least over here, prepping's got kind of a bad reputation.
Same here.
It used to have until February this year. Now it's suddenly somewhat in the front of people's minds, though.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody thinks that prepared people, preppers, are wackos until there's actually a need to be prepared. Hey, the power went out and I have no heat. Can I come stay at your place? No.
Exactly, and I'm lucky though. I live out.
I mean, I'd say yes, but still,
yeah, yeah, but not everyone would. I
Right.
live out in the countryside. I got a wood stove, and I use
Yeah.
that for most of my heating needs during the winter. Anyway, I got a little bit of extra firewood this year compared to other years, both because electricity is insanely expensive at the moment, and because it's a good backup. You don't need a lot of technology to create heat with firewood. And I see Smoking Apes in the house, and I guess this is the first time you've been on my stream, Ape, so welcome. And William says, do a Ted Cruz, and I don't actually know what he's talking about there.
I think he's talking about defending yourself from intruders. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you come over my house in the winter and it's because you're out of heat and I have heat, then I know where the chainsaws are and the saws are and the wheelbarrows and the snow shovels, and I'll get you plenty warm.
Yeah.
Collecting firewood.
And community is actually important in preparations as well, because at some point you need to rely on someone outside your immediate family.
You do. Yeah. There's no such thing as disconnected or off grid 100%. There's always something that you need somebody else for. And there's always something that somebody needs you for. And there's a good value exchange there.
Yeah. And then you got somewhat of a border economy should the economy collapse. But there's a long way though from a fire or power down scenario to the economy collapsing. But still, I don't carry cash anymore. We're pretty much a cashless society here. I got my cards. I got my online payment solutions, but those won't work in a gray down situation.
Won't do you any good. Nope.
So
we learned here pretty quickly when we moved. We're in a very rural area. I have 40 acres of land here, and I can't see any neighbors from anybody in any window of my house. And that's not to say I'm wealthy. I mean, it's a really cheap area to live in. So it's one of the reasons we moved out here. But because of that, there's a lot of independent contractors, people like electricians or plumbers or something like that. They'll come out and they'll do the work and they want payment right away in cash. Okay, I guess you wait here. I'll be right back. I'm going down to the store to get some.
Yeah. And at least in the event of somewhat of a crisis, cash would be good to have. Not a lot of cash probably, but a little bit to get you started with the barter process. But back to communications, which is kind of the topic of today. What I've been outlining in my head is somewhat that you could use the free radio services, either CB 11 meters or FRS PMR and those services for local comms. And there'll probably be a ham in some areas anyway that could do some outreach to other areas, probably outside the immediate disaster area. And what do you think about that thought, Steve? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we've talked about at our local ham club is in the event of an emergency where there's going to need to be some kind of response, the way that the U.S. is set up now, ham radio operators are not the first line of defense. Usually, I forget what the organ is, FEMA. Usually FEMA is called in or the Red Cross is called in, and they rely on Cisco, the big internet routing company. Cisco has these trucks that drop off communications infrastructure for emergency calls, but that's only for official emergency communication calls, not necessarily for telling your grandmother who lives 2 states away that you made it through the eye of the hurricane and everything's safe and the rest of the storm is coming and you'll check back in another half an hour or 45 minutes or so. And that's where the ham radio operators in my area can come into play. We can set up what we call a hospitality station, and people can come in and say, I live in this area. This is my name and address and phone number, and we can send a radiogram out to indicate that they're safe to somebody out of the area. Even like I'm in Wisconsin, and geographically Texas is a day's drive away from me by car, maybe even a little bit longer. But I can get a message to Texas over ham radio in seconds. And then that person can pick up their phone and call my family in Maryland and say, he's okay. So something that we can provide as a service while we're in that kind of situation.
Yeah, and that's an important bit of information, at least for those people that watch on the news and get news that something has happened and
Mhm.
can't get a reach of you. And it'll do a lot of help for those people to know that you're all right, or even if you're not all right, to know that you're not all right, but you're doing this and that to help the situation,
Right.
and get communications from within the let's call it for simplicity disaster area. And I see that William comments that Florida's got a microwave link up for hams that works all the time in case of emergencies. Yeah, I actually heard about that during the last hurricane. That was hurricane. I was going to say Ian, but that's not it.
Might be.
But
Might be.
yeah, it might be. Yeah. And I guess what it means is that the repeaters are linked through microwave, though. That's at least that's how I've understood it. And that might be a double-edged sword, though. You'll be able to reach the entire area, but you'll probably also get a lot of people kerchunking the repeaters and keep them occupied for non-emergency purposes.
Well, hopefully there's a net control operator that can lend some assistance in there. And that's what happens around here. We get tornadoes that kind of pop up in the middle of the day or the middle of the night, and no one's around to, like you're not listening to anything. So you'll hear your weather alert go off, and then you jump on the local repeater and try and figure out who knows what and who's safe and who needs what help and that kind of thing. And we have a net control operator that says, we're starting a net right now, taking check-ins, and then run down the list. And totally different than your Monday night net where you just go around the horn and chew the rag for a bit with your club members.
Exactly, and tornadoes is actually for you guys a reason to be prepared, though,
Oh yeah.
because they usually happen without warning. Whereas a hurricane, you probably know that a hurricane's going to hit
Couple
4,
of
5,
days.
6 days before it hits. Whereas a tornado happens when it happens. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, I grew up in a hurricane area in Maryland, right on the Atlantic Ocean on the eastern shore of the USA, and then I moved inland to Wisconsin. And taking your emergency preparedness skills from Maryland to Wisconsin a little bit relates, but not 100%, because you have hurricanes in Maryland, you have tornadoes in Wisconsin. You don't really have snow in Maryland, and you have a lot of snow in Wisconsin. So it's a totally different strategy, totally different battle plan for those two regions. And you probably have something similar in your area.
Yeah, we don't have tornadoes, but as you, I grew up on the Atlantic coast, although on the other side of the Atlantic, and we had hurricanes and storms as well. And the preparedness mindset is completely different, as you say, because we didn't have thunderstorms where I grew up, whereas there are a lot of thunderstorms here that start forest fires, take electricity out, and
Yeah.
all those kind of things. And that was strange for me when I moved down here 15, 16 years ago. I've never really experienced a thunderstorm except for the time I lived in the Midwest.
That's weird. I've never had a situation where I haven't had thunderstorms. I don't know. That'd be weird seeing my first thunderstorm ever. That'd probably be pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them, but not on the scale that we have
Oh,
down
what was
here.
that? You know?
Yeah, and I didn't think about plugging my equipment out
Right.
when I moved down here. And 2 computers later, I would learn my lesson.
Wow. Yeah, we had surge protectors all the time growing up, and I'll unplug my antennas when a storm is a brewing. Usually, I can hear it pretty far away. I've lost some lights um, because of lightning in the area. Like I guess there's an EMP charge or a static charge that happens. That's when the lightning is close enough, but not hitting it directly. And since then, I've rewired those lights because they weren't wired properly and haven't had a problem.
Yeah. And I see John Davis got a comment here. Local, regional, and national networks should be established independently, but relay similar info until that message is superseded. And that's an excellent point, though, because independent networks does have there's no single point of failure there. There's some kind of redundancy that is somewhat lacking in a lot of countries, considering information infrastructure. And I think that's one of the reasons why Ukraine has managed to do the communication so well, because their cell networks are local and regional and not national. So that has helped a lot. At least according to a guest I had on 2 weeks ago, Eric Hatram, and I think he's here in the chat, so he's probably got a comment about that. As far as I know, if there's something he's interested in, he usually comes with a comment. Um, but I mean, ham radios are independent by nature, or radio communications as independent by nature, and that kind of makes us perhaps better suited. Speaking of communications in case of a crisis, isn't that correct?
That does, yes.
So, and I haven't really dived into. I haven't really dived into WinLink yet, but I figured there will probably, or if there's a use for WinLink, it might be good to have my equipment set up and know how to use it, because that's a really good challenge for amateur radio operators to get outside of the ham radio community.
Right. I've set up WinLink before. I've sent a couple of messages. Does WinLink allow you to send a message outside of ham radio? Can I send myself an email to my Gmail account via WinLink?
Yeah, you can. You can send to
Okay.
any email account,
Okay.
and you can receive from any email account, as long as you're not doing WinLink peer to peer, which I haven't really managed to get working. I tried to stream on it a couple of months ago, but couldn't get it to work. But
It's fun to play with. Yeah.
it is, and it is a good service, not for everyday use, but should internet go down in your area, you can still get a message out. And like, let's say in Florida during the last hurricane, though, if you had WinLink, you could get a message that you're okay outside your immediate area.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm gonna have to try that. I've never tried WinLink outside of ham.
So I guess that might be a Ham Nuggets episode.
Could be. Yeah. So every Monday night, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6:30 p.m. Central Time, we all get together as a club and try something that we probably haven't tried before, or at least one of us hasn't tried before, and we hammer our way through it for about an hour and a half, or sometimes we go into extended overtime if nobody's going on after us, and just have fun playing. So it's a good hangout.
Absolutely. I see John Davis comments that cell towers will fail without backup power. Expect to only be able to use text message and not voice
Right.
on emergency power. And that's a good point though, because there are backup power solutions on most cell towers, but they won't run for an infinite amount of
Right.
time.
Right. And the other thing to think about with cell phone towers is they're not designed, they're oversubscribed. So if you have 100,000 cell phone users in your area, the cell phone tower is probably only rated for 5,000, maybe
Yeah.
10,000 tops. So in the event of an emergency, everybody's going to be trying to send a message and you won't get a clear signal.
And I see Eric comments on the Ukraine and the cell phone infrastructure that I am correct. So that's good. And Pat here comments that data
You just got to drive by.
you shouldn't be running data on the cell towers during an emergency because
Right.
that
I'm
would
going to be
probably,
streaming Netflix over the cell tower.
yeah.
Nothing else to do.
Yeah, it's an emergency, so what's you supposed to do?
Right.
Um, so and I see Liberty Cave comments also on the oversubscription on cell towers here that during tsunamis in Crescent City, California, cell phones were worthless. And that's usually the way it is though. And it doesn't have to be a crisis. It could be a sports event.
Yeah.
It could be a music festival. If the people arranging the festival or the sporting event aren't prepared and haven't managed to get extra capacity in the phone networks, they just won't work.
Yeah, we've seen that with sporting events here.
Yeah, we see that here all the time. So
Oversubscribed.
Andy says you could get FT8 on CB, but I'm not sure how FT8 would help you in case of an emergency, though. Well,
People would know you're still alive.
Yeah, you could use some custom messages, but the chance of people
Yeah.
actually reading them, that's kind of. But I've seen people do JS8 over CB, but I've never been a CBer. I've rarely touched a CB radio, so
Radio's radio, man.
Yeah, I should get one just to try it out.
It would be fun. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Mars Mod one of the radios you have, and then you can listen to CB.
Yeah,
totally illegal to transmit.
Yeah, only 4 watts, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
because all CBers limit themselves to the 4 watts.
Yeah, they're like Italians.
Nobody's made an amplifier for CB radio.
And Dan says that WinLink Wednesday has some good WinLink exercises, and I'll actually Google that straight away and see if we can get it up on screen here.
Yeah, I need to join in on that.
Let's see here. And that looks like the typical ham radio webpage.
1990s called?
GeoCities is called. Let's get it up on screen here. We got it right here. Or we should have it right
there
here.
It is. Oh, I like that Miami Vice style logo too.
You kind of gave your age away there.
We're all the same age.
So, let's see. It's not the easiest site to navigate, though. Let's have a look. There's a participant map here.
Nice.
Yeah, it seems to be working well in the United States. Let's check out what it is in Europe. It's not as much in use in Europe. I can see that. Still should be able to get some contacts on 20 and 40 meter here on WinLink, though. So yeah, I'll have a look into that. Or even some training videos here. Yeah, I'll have a look at that later on. And Pat asks, what's a Miami Vice?
It's a Vice that you can only do in Miami.
Exactly. Let's see. Let's get that away.
Pat knows anyway. It was
Yeah,
on reruns when Pat was a kid.
Dan says that many states have WinLink Wednesday. Yeah, I wasn't actually allowed to see Miami Vice when growing up. So,
Too racy for young Morton.
yeah, it was too violent. So, and let's see if there are any other comments that I've missed. Pat's a first responder, so he can have priority traffic into the cell towers.
Got this bodiless head walking behind you.
Yeah. William asks if we do have to wear pastel colors and wear shoulder pads for WinLink Wednesday.
Yes, get your blazer out.
So,
but hey, you get a free Ferrari, so definitely join in.
Yeah. And besides WinLink, I guess JS8 call would work as well, but you can't relay information outside the ham community on JS8 call. But that's a good way as well to get information sent out. And I guess I lost Steve here. Oh, there you are.
No, I'm here.
Yeah. So JS8 call, and I don't know, have I tried VAR AC?
Yeah, so JS8 call is one of those things where, like, I understand the concept of what the program is trying to do. However, I don't know how to do it. Like, sit somebody down who's never used a ham radio before in front of an HF radio, and good luck. Like, that's kind of how I feel about JS8 call. I mean, this is why you need to practice these things. You need to get familiar with them. You need to know when the bands are open, what band to use, what antenna to use, how much power to use, who you're talking to, what kind of communications you're trying to have. But if you just open up JS8 call software, like, how would I send a message for help?
Yeah, you won't be able to use it. And even an experienced ham might have some troubles using JS8 call. Yeah. Ham software is not really on top of user friendliness. So you need to have some practice, and you need to know how to use the equipment. But my thought is, if you're not a ham and there is a ham in your neighborhood, that would be a great resource in case of an emergency.
Yep.
And that might be the role we hams probably will need to take in case of an emergency.
And I know there's quite a lot of videos out on YouTube about how to do this stuff, like how to send radiograms, or how to join a net, or even what nets sound like when you're on, or take a station portable and activate, get your radio up and running when you're away from your home. There's lots of videos on that stuff.
Yeah, and actually Parks on the Air, Summits on the Air, and those programs are good programs to get you prepared for emergencies, because you learn how to optimize your station for portability. So that would be I consider those programs emergency preparedness, actually.
Yep. And they're fun while you're at it too.
Actually, yeah, absolutely. They're a lot of fun. Liberty Cave says Jay's call is wonderful. And it deserves more popularity. It probably does. And that's kind of my biggest caveat with JS8 call. Every time I try it, there's no one on to have a CUSA with.
Right.
And if I should find someone to have a CUSA with, it's usually just to use that expression, a sad ham. So that's but it's let's say it's a Digimode with a lot of potential, but it's not used as much as it probably should be. Liberty Cave said that OrcaNet is a good drill for digital messaging, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Liberty Cave, because I don't know what OrcaNet is. Do you, Steve?
I do not. No, we have another one over here called Saturn, which is the Salvation Army run program, and they send data files back and forth as part of their net operations. They do practice nets on like Saturday mornings or something.
Okay, so hams within the Salvation Army then.
Yeah.
Am I correct? Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good skill to have, though. Not only for us hams, but for relief organizations as well. And at least I know in the Norwegian Red Cross, there is a big focus on radio communication and being able to do emergency communications. I don't know how that is in the United States, or if it's centered around hams and government-run communications.
So, if you're going to be an emergency responder in the US, we have two programs, ARES and RACES. And ARES is like Amateur Radio Emergency Services, and RACES is Radio Amateur Communication something, 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 emergency service, I guess. One of them is more attached to the military than the other one is. But you need to go through Homeland Security, and you need to take a bunch of tests and get a bunch of certifications and get an ID in the mail and get in line with your local group that your local ARES group, and follow their regulations and requirements. And then in the state of an emergency, they may call you. But I have not seen an ARES activation in my area since I've lived here. And it's been like 8 years.
Okay, yeah. So and that's the point, though, because the respond organizations, or the volunteer organizations, also need to test and try and practice their skills and their equipment. Let's say in the UK they have Raynet. Dan says check out Black Swan Net on YouTube. I'll have to check that out later on. So just to conclude a little bit, though, I mean, should hams be part of emergency communications, and are we needed? Just as a closing question here, Steve.
I think that they don't know how much we are needed. I think that's where we have fallen. Ham radio, like the pre-cell phone era, ham radio was the way that you communicated during your drive to and from work, and everybody thought that ham radio was pretty ubiquitous. And it was such a ubiquitous, fantastic, great idea that cell phones were invented. And now nobody knows what radios are anymore, it seems, because your cell phone has all these radios in it that nobody knows actually even exist. It's all just magic. And I dial the number and the phone connects and everything's fine. But there's radio infrastructure behind that. And as hams, we know, or we're learning how to know, or we definitely are on the track to get there, to make these communication systems without the infrastructure of the cell towers and the big companies and so forth. We can do, for less than $1,000, you can get yourself a station that will communicate worldwide.
Exactly. And that's a good point, though. And if we don't have the knowledge, we at least know how to find the knowledge, even
Right.
in a grid down situation, and we know how to experiment and build things. So that's a good thing. And I think knowledge is probably the most important thing about having a ham radio license. It's not necessarily a license to talk on the radio, but it's a license to know how communications work, and how to get your signal to wherever you need it to go.
Okay.
So what's going on your channel, Steve? Just before we end
Yeah,
this?
I'm playing around with this Zygu G106 radio. It's a new radio from Zygu. It's QRP rated. It's supposed to be 5 watts is what they advertise it, but I've been getting more power out of it with zero modification. I'm doing 20 meter FT8 right now at almost 8 watts, and it's running nice and cool, and it does the thing. And I'm trying to figure out its value proposition. It seems a little expensive, but at the same time, it's fairly well built. So, where do we go from here with this radio? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. And right now, I'm kind of learning that it might be the best accessory for their XPA 125B 100 watt amp. It might be just the right amount of radio for that amplifier.
So they made an accessory for their amplifier. Then that's your thought on that.
That seems like it's the best value proposition. Like buying an ICOM 705 and the XPA 125B is extremely expensive. It's a $1,400 radio with a $600 or $700 amplifier. This is a $300 radio with a $600 amplifier. At which point you bought a 7300.
Yeah, but yeah, you're actually the first I've seen that hasn't really just disliked the radio. And and when I saw the 106 was announced, I figured it's a cool looking little radio, and it probably has so much potential for at least new hams. Although you shouldn't recommend QRP for new hams, but
QRP and digital modes are okay.
Yeah.
You'll get very far. I mean, I made 40 contacts yesterday just trying to set FT8 up on it, and it works fine. It's not as hard. QRP for voice, it seems like it's impossible. That's where you got to have a lot of skills and a lot of polish and kind of know how the bands work and why you can hear somebody in California and they can't hear you at all. You don't have an RF path there. It has nothing to do with, I mean, you can brute force your way through with more power, but if you can find a better RF path, then like I have a fantastic pipeline from Wisconsin to Texas over here. So.
Yeah, and QRP is not easy, but then we're back to knowing your gear and being prepared, though.
Right.
So there's kind of that. I mean, that's a common denominator for all we do. It's knowing the gear and knowing how to optimize it within the boundaries of the gear.
Right.
And you might not have enough power, but you could build a better antenna.
Yep. So if you guys haven't seen my channel, I'm on YouTube. It's Temporarily Offline Ham Radio, and I get new radios and I hack them and play with them and extend them beyond their capabilities, and I get radio kits and build them and all kinds of stuff like that. So we always have a lot of fun over there, and super encouraging of new hams and people who are learning, and like whatever antenna you have is good enough. We're not out to ham shame you. Get on the air and have fun.
Yeah, and you got a great Discord service as well, Steve.
Yep. Yeah,
and
that's your Discord too.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll put a link for your channel down below. I copied that as well and meant to post it in the description, but I didn't do that, and I didn't manage to give you the link for the stream. So, but
we still pulled it off.
Out. Yeah. So thank you for being on, Steve. It's
definitely.
A pleasure
Thank you.
to have you on, and hopefully the viewers got something out of it. And my next stream will be next Sunday with LB4FH. He's going to talk about summits on the air on my channel. He does a lot more summits on the air than most people do, so it's going to be interesting to hear his experiences and views upon that. But thank you for watching Sunday 7-3.